From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
In his first full year at the helm of the Rhode Island Education Department, Dr. Ken Wagner is rolling out major new policy initiatives, including a plan to give schools the option to take part in a school choice program and an attempt to empower principals at individual schools. Will the teachers union buy in? This week on Newsmakers, Education Commissioner Dr. Ken Wagner.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program, both from WPRI.com, Ted Nisi and Dan McGowan. Dr. Wagner, Education Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us on the program. It's good to have you back.
Thank you.
So I want to give you a chance to make your big elevator pitch. We're taping this on a Thursday morning. You had your State of the Education speech last night before the General Assembly, and I want the viewers to help you understand again, in an elevator pitch, what's your big idea here? What is the School and Family Empowerment Act?
Great. And just a clarification on the intro.
Sure.
It's not about empowering principals. It's about empowering the people in the school building, which is principals working side by side with teachers. So this is very much about elevating the voices of both principals and teachers. And really the empowerment package is a voluntary framework that just allows us, if we want to, if the schools want to change approaches. We've had a very top-down approach in Rhode Island and in many parts of the country that's really been focused on failure. Let's find the failing kids in the failing schools with the failing teachers and just kind of remediate them. And we think that we have to change approaches because that failure approach is just never going to work. We need to extend the standards work by exposing all students access to advanced coursework. We need to rethink how we do schooling, and we need to give principals and teachers, families and students the power to execute on that kind of vision. You can't stand on people's chests and tell them to breathe. You need to get off their chests, allow them to breathe. You need to let people teach and give them the authority to teach in the way that they think is most appropriate, and then it's more authentic to hold them accountable. So this is about holding people accountable but giving them the space to choose how they're going to execute on their vision for their kids in their schools.
So the devil, as always, is in the details, and that's what we're going to get into today on the program. But I'll tell you, empowerment schools is, to me, the big umbrella, the big pillar, I think, in your policy. But one piece that I think is probably dominating parents is in their minds is the school choice aspect. And parents in East Greenwich might wonder after reading the articles and watching your speech, might wonder if their high school is suddenly going to get flooded with kids from underperforming high schools, from bad high schools. Is that going to happen?
No, not unless the schools want it to happen. In the empowerment package, which is voluntary, if 2/3 of the teachers say they want to do it, plus the principal, plus the superintendent, plus the school committee, if everybody agrees they want to do it, they have 4 categories of choices to take advantage of. Do they want regulatory flexibility, yes or no? Do they want to give the principals and their teachers more autonomy, yes or no? Do they want to try to do flexible work at the building level for the district teacher contract, yes or no? And the last question is, do they want to accept students from other school districts, yes or no? Each of those 4 categories are totally determined at the local level, and schools and school districts will have the plan that they want. This is not my plan, this is their plan. Work to make those kinds of decisions.
Well, you must have thought this out a little bit. I mean, do you have a number in mind that you expect students to eventually move? How many students, what percentage of students in Rhode Island to move from, say, one district to another?
So really what we're trying to do is have a strategy, like all high-performing organizations have a strategy to try things, to have an incubator strategy and see what people like, see what works, and then you can scale up the things that work. So what this does is it gives schools an opportunity to try things. Maybe a school wants to be a science academy. Maybe a school wants to focus on the arts. Maybe a school wants to focus on teaching bilingual in 2 different languages. Those would be their choices. And then maybe they want to offer those options to people who don't happen to live in the district. This is going to be a slow process. If I had a target, I'd say in the first 2 years of the program, we'd have maybe 5 to 10 schools after a year of planning, and then we would take it and see how it goes. In other states, and most states have some form of interdistrict enrollment transfer, and in most states that have that, it's a trickle of students that actually take advantage of it. Most people want to have their children go to their neighborhood school, but we just want to offer options because one school can never possibly meet the needs of all kids all the time.
Who pays for it? Do districts cut each other checks based on where their students end up? You know, if someone went from Hope High to East Greenwich, would Providence cut a check to East Greenwich? How does that work?
So the good news is we've worked all of those details out. We have a funding formula where the dollars follow the students. The challenge right now is the only mechanism for dollars following the students is either in the charter schools, if a family chooses to send their child to the charter schools, or if a student chooses to go to a CTE program, the dollars follow the students. So all this proposal is doing is opening up what currently exists for charter school students and for career and technical education students and making it available for students who go to other district schools. What we want to do,
yes, the answer to my question is yes.
What we want to do is offer...
Hold on, the answer to my question is yes, right? Providence would send money along with the child who switches from a Providence school to an East Greenwich school if that happened?
The dollars would follow the students.
So that district would lose money.
The district would losing money assumes that the arrow points in one direction. What I would suggest is that if schools start to open up offerings to families, and families have the option to choose offerings that appeal to them, we can't assume that the arrow is going to point net out from one school to another school. What I would love to see happen, first of all, I want people to stay in their neighborhood schools. I just want to give them the tools, the flexibility to make those schools as good as they can possibly be. But if some families go to school B, I'm assuming other families are going to go from school B to back to school A.
Do you really think that?
And the arrows will go in both directions. I really think that, yeah.
You think East Greenwich High students will want to go to Hope High?
I do think that if Hope High is at the top of their game and they have the flexibility and autonomy to do that, that yes, they can create compelling programs, just like anybody can create compelling programs that people will go to. To assume that an urban school couldn't possibly create a program that suburban parents would want to send their children to, I think is an assumption that not only is condescending, but also isn't true. We have lots of urban schools that have a tremendous amount of talent. They just need the shackles to come off. They need to be unleashed so they can just exercise the talent that they have and execute on the vision that they see for their kids.
So make the case for us. What does the ideal empowerment school look like in your eyes?
So if I were designing an empowerment school, which I'm not, we're asking local communities
Sure, right,
to
we get
design their
that,
own
but
programs.
you're the commissioner. Make the case.
So I would do a bilingual dual language program in STEM. I would say, hey, the future of our economy is science, technology, engineering, and math, including computer science, and the future of our world is people as a positive asset to be able to speak more than one language. So what I would do is I would teach STEM fields in 2 languages, and then the students that came out of my school would be ideally prepared for whatever they're going to go into.
So that sounds like a great school. How much does it cost if a school wants to do that?
So schools we assume that things that improve education always cost more money, and I just don't buy that. Now, of course, we want to fund our schools just as well as we can, but we're spending money on schools, and schools are offering class options. Sometimes it's just about when you get a vision that's supported by the teachers in that school, using the dollars in a way that helps them execute.
So there will be no extra money given to schools that want to become empowerment schools?
So the governor has put up to $3 million in the budget, $1 million for planning.
Right.
Next year would be a planning year for schools that are interested to take a look at this and see if it works for them, plus another $1 million for leadership development, because we can't pretend that there's just the leadership capacity to make this work. So $1 million for leadership development, and then $750,000 for teachers to come out of the classroom and serve a statewide leadership role around improving instruction to help make this happen as well.
How soon could we have schools in Rhode Island, if your plan passes, how soon could schools convert to empowerment schools? Like, it seems like maybe too quick for this coming school year, but I don't know.
Yeah, so we have a 3-year phase-in period. Next year, 2016, 2017, would be the planning year using the innovation grants in the governor's budget. The following year, 2017, 2018, would be the first pilot year for empowerment schools, and then the year after that, 18, 19, would be the first year that empowerment schools, if they want to, could open their doors to enrollment transfer.
So Ted said if your plan passes, and of course it has to get through the General Assembly. It's in the budget. But let's just say it gets through the General Assembly. It passes that process. For a school to be an empowerment school, it would need 2/3 vote by teachers, approval from the school committee, and the superintendent. I got to tell you, that seems like a really steep hill to climb.
Yeah, but either you're focused on top-down change, where we're just going to come up with the right idea and we're going to force everyone to do it and just bulldoze them over, which doesn't last, it doesn't work, and so on. Or you're going to have change that's more organic, comes from the bottom up, where people believe in it and they own it. And if you're committed to the latter, which I am, I want people to believe in it and own it because they'll do it better and it'll last longer, you're going to have to work on a consensus model. But there is I have to tell you, I've been talking to people about this for 4 months, and I don't think I had a single person who said to me that releasing the top-down approach and having a bottom-up empowerment approach is the wrong direction. I think virtually everyone that I've spoken to has said it's the right direction. Now, there's disagreements over some of the details. There's always going to be disagreements, but those disagreements over the details can be worked out at the local level as they figure out how to construct their plan. But there seems to be overwhelming consensus within Rhode Island that the time is right to move our schools forward, get ready for the 21st century. We have to give the authority, autonomy, and flexibility to the people in the schools.
Do you think it's enough, though, for the poorest performing schools in the state? Do you think, one, that the poorest performing schools will actually buy in and move forward with this? And is this plan enough to get those, schools back to maybe a decent level school for parents to send their kids?
Yeah, so that's how I started. No, I don't. Empowerment is not the panacea that's going to solve all of our problems. It's a component of the framework. But I would talk equally passionately, and I'd be happy to come back on the show for, we need to have all kids being in advanced coursework. We have to stop the tracking that happens in elementary and middle school all the way through high school, where we decide who gets the kinds of learning experiences that are really going to prepare them for 21st century jobs and colleges and who doesn't. All kids need to have access to that curriculum, and we need to take a serious look at student engagement and start doing how we do schooling, doing it differently. So no, empowerment is not the everything. It's the framework that allows people to execute on the broader.
But I want to go back, I'm sorry, I just want to go back to the steep hill that I mentioned. Already unions are blustering at this. The president of the state's NEA says his union is, quote, concerned about language that might weaken and undermine the collective bargaining rights of education professionals. And as Dan wrote about yesterday, more pointedly in a Facebook post, the president of the Providence Teachers Union called it, quote, an end run around collective bargaining and another backdoor union busting deal. And I think he went on to say no after that. Respond to that. Are you trying to take some control back from the unions here? That's what they're saying.
Yeah. So the conversations with the unions have been going on since I started back in August, and they'll continue to go on. If you look at the text of the proposed Empowerment Act, I think it's mentioned explicitly 3 or 4 times. Nothing in this act is construed as abrogating the local district contract. Nothing in this act is getting rid of collective bargaining or anything like that. The only thing that this does is it formalizes a framework for if 2/3 of the teachers who are members of the bargaining unit wish to have a version of the contract that is slightly different for their school than the overall district contract, that there's a process to do a memorandum of agreement to the underlying district contract.
Isn't that what they're having an issue with?
Right.
Having
the MOU, isn't that the big issue there?
Teacher unions have been doing this kind of work both across the country. AFT unions as well as NEA unions have forever been doing local school-based MOUs. It's been happening. There have been empowerment groups across the country doing these kinds of things. There's an organization called Teacher-Powered Schools where NEA has sent representatives doing this kind of thing. Al Shanker, as I mentioned in this speech last night, basically called for this kind of work. Right now in Pawtucket, there are 2 schools that have an MOU to the underlying district contract in order to execute on their transformation work. This stuff that is in the bill happens all the time. There's no news here. There's nothing new here.
We have to go to a break, but I mean, that obviously is not the kind of response you wanted from the unions right out of the box.
No. If you're committed to the conversation, the dialogue, you're committed to the conversation, the dialogue. I think our union colleagues need to bring to us their concerns, and we'll keep talking. So this is exactly the kind of engagement that we need.
All right, our guest this week is Rhode Island Commissioner of Education, Dr. Ken Wagner. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right from WPRI.com, Ted Nesi and Dan McGowan. Our guest this week is Rhode Island Education Commissioner, Dr. Ken Wagner. Dan?
Commissioner, I want to just stay on empowerment schools for just a little while longer. The initial idea is for these schools to be to have 3-year agreements with their local districts. I'm curious about what happens after the 3 years and what role Rhode actually will play in allowing it to continue if it's not working, let's say, in a school?
Sure. Yeah. Again, this is a framework for districts and schools to try things and see what they want to change system-wide, if there's anything. So the term is 3 years. It could be ended at district, as part of the plan. They should have a mechanism for how it would end if they want to end prior to the 3 years. And then there's also the ability to extend it in 3-year increments after that. Rhode plays no role in the approval of the programs. It's completely approved locally. However, we do reserve the right in extreme circumstances to end the designation if something is going terribly wrong.
Okay, so you could come in and say, this has been, it might have been a noble idea, but this has been a failure. We're not allowing it anymore.
Yeah, but we try to restrict that it's if there's like something really bad happening, health and welfare, or other kinds of things, that we would then have in the statute. We would have the ability to recommend to the council that the designation should end.
Has anyone on your staff raised a concern that you're trying to make these changes through the General Assembly during an election year?
So, I don't think our schools can wait a year because we're holding an election. We have work to do.
But you've been in this for a long time. You worked in New York for a long time. Do you think politics is going to play a factor?
I think that if you make a proposal that is compelling and that is advantageous to the people in the schools, the teachers and principals that are doing the work, that people will see that it's something that's going to help move our system forward. If we were proposing mandatory empowerment, that everybody had to be empowered, which is kind of funny when you say it, then yeah, I suppose. But we're proposing something that literally everything that we're proposing in the empowerment package, people have been asking for in different forms for 10, 20, 30 years. So we're offering people a framework that lets them have the things that they've been asking for, stop the top-down approach, and we've made it voluntary to boot. So I can't think of a reform package that isn't less objectionable than what we're proposing.
Is that your pitch to lawmakers? Look, it's voluntary. We're not shoving it down your throat. If the district, the school, or the unions don't want it at their school, they don't have to have it?
Exactly. And if there's one thing that I heard when I came into Rhode Island is stop the top-down approach, stop the mandates, give us the space to teach, stop focusing on the tests, let's focus on teaching and learning. So I'm saying, yes, here we are, let's stop the mandates, let's stop focusing on the tests, let's focus on teaching and learning, and let's make it voluntary to boot. And everyone has said directionally this is the way to go, and any of the details that people don't like, then they can manage those locally. If a particular school district doesn't like the offer of contract flexibility, then they don't have to do contract flexibility. They can take advantage of the autonomy and the regulatory flexibility and the open enrollment. Each of those 4 components are completely voluntary.
Well, defenders of the top-down approach, I assume, would say there's a reason they pursued that, which is when you make it voluntary, you mean you're not going to touch a lot of schools that maybe need a lot of help. I mean, what do you say to, there are going to be people who listen to this interview and say, wow, all he talks about is making sure people can avoid making changes when we have schools that are underperforming all over the place. What do you say to those people who say this isn't enough?
No, I think it's an important issue. The framework should be holding people accountable, not telling them what to do on Monday, what to do on Tuesday, and what not to do on Wednesday, and what to do on Thursday. Hold them accountable. Absolutely. And with the reauthorization of the federal law, we're going to make our accountability system even stronger by focusing on things like student access to and preparation for advanced coursework. So you will never hear me back away from standards or accountability. What I'm saying is just make it real instead of a facade, and give people the authority to figure out how they're going to be held accountable.
What was the facade?
The facade was we have people execute on our script, and then we hold them accountable for our script. And then they say, this doesn't make any sense. It wasn't our work, it was your work. So what I'm saying is hold them accountable, but then let them determine how they're going to do it.
So the standards, you need to stand, it sounds like you think you need to set standards in a top-down way, or at least at your level of where we want you to get, but don't dictate how you get there.
Exactly. We are going to maintain our grade level learning expectations. We're going to maintain, consistent with federal law, our requirement that we have comparable measures of student progress, the assessments. We're going to maintain our graduation requirements, which are going through a review process. We're going to maintain accountability systems consistent with federal law. But then what we're proposing is to give people much more space to figure out how to do it.
I'm going back to the school choice thing, and this is such minutia, but parents might be wondering this. If a kid's going to go from one school to another in a different district, how do they get there?
Yeah.
I mean, mom and dad going to drive them?
Great question, and there's lots of details that are not only going to slow this down, which is perfectly fine, but also that we're going to need to work through. The way we proposed it is we have transportation zones right now. Schools are in zones. And the way we proposed it is that if a student wants to go to another school within the zone, that when the dollars follow the students, the receiving school would pay for the transportation out of the dollars that follow the students.
How big are these zones?
It varies. They're kind of like contiguous neighborhood, regional type zones. Now, people have said we need to revisit what the zones look like, and we'll take a look at that. If the student wants to go to a school outside of the zone, then the student would have to be responsible for the transportation. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to balance opportunities for students and families with risks to school districts. Because if Westerly, for example, is going to be worried that they're going to get a ton of kids from Smithfield, which is very far away, and they'd have to cover the cost for transportation, they may never open their doors. But if Westerly knows that their transportation risk is just limited to their region, then it makes it much more palatable to them.
Let's talk about another election year hot button issue, charter schools. The governor has proposed basically returning a little bit of money, $350 from charter school to the sending school district. So if Providence sends a kid to Achievement First, the Providence School Department would get that money back. On the flip side, there's also these two pieces of legislation that would strongly, critics say would really restrict the growth of charter schools. What happens if both the charter school money give back is in the budget and those two bills are approved? And what happens to charter schools?
Yeah. See, I'm really trying to change the narrative that we've been having around charter schools. We're fighting over charter schools versus district schools, and what I'm trying to say is, hey, we can do whatever we're going to do with charter schools, but we can't ignore the fact that there is incredible demand for charter schools within Rhode Island, and we have to have a strategy for that, and pretending that the demand doesn't exist is not a strategy. So what I'm saying, rather than just fighting over whether we should stop charter growth or shut charters down or so on, and I think we need charters, they make the whole system stronger, good charters make the whole system stronger, we need to give districts and district schools the tools so they can act more like charter schools if they want to, the kind of flexibility and autonomy. So we'll figure out whatever's going to happen in terms of legislative around charter growth. We believe that the fiscal adjustments that we proposed are fair based on actual data of unique district costs versus charter school costs. But no matter how that pans out, we have to have a strategy to strengthen our district.
If those charter school growth bills do pass, would you encourage the governor to veto them?
So we need to let that process play out. I don't personally think that stopping something from growing that people are asking for, thousands of people are on charter school waiting lists, I don't think just stopping that is necessarily the healthiest strategy.
And presumably you have her ear.
I would much prefer us focus on addressing the demand by strengthening the district schools, so then we don't have to have this narrative, district schools versus charter schools.
The endless comparisons in Rhode Island are with Massachusetts on schools. Massachusetts obviously did their big bang education reform package back in the 90s. What would it take for Rhode Island schools to match, do you think, the performance of Massachusetts schools?
Yeah, and it's if you look at neighboring communities, literally across the border from each other, students in Seekonk as compared to students in East Providence, the performance that you see in those neighboring communities are just different. And what that tells me is the things that Massachusetts has been doing over the past 20 years, things like high standards, focusing on teaching and leadership, focusing on school empowerment and interdistrict enrollment, works if you stick to it. Massachusetts has stuck to it for 20 years. So what I want us to do is just focus on what works. Let's not chase some shiny new thing. Let's just focus on what we know works, stick to it, and then we will see the kind of results that Massachusetts has
I'm not
seen.
going to pretend to be an expert on Massachusetts education policy, but I talked to some people who I think are. And you like to say that Massachusetts is already doing this level of empowerment, but what they tell me is their version of empowerment is more palatable by the unions, and they were wondering, why do you feel like you need to reinvent the wheel? Why didn't you just mirror Massachusetts law, their policy?
So the only thing that we're proposing that's a little bit different than what Massachusetts is doing is the idea of the school-based local flexibility of contract work. We believe that having a school have autonomy needs means flexibility not just from state rules and regulations, but potentially, if the school wants it, some flexibility from the local district contract. But as I said before, if a local school doesn't want that and they want only what their colleagues in Massachusetts has, that's perfectly fine. They could just, when they develop their local plan, just not take advantage of the proposal for contract flexibility.
You talked about supporting.
We have about a minute and a half
You
left.
talked about supporting high standards. Every commissioner, of course, says that, but you have agreed to allow the graduation requirement that has the testing component in it to be pushed back. In fact, 2020 will no longer be that first year of that implementation. When do you think we will see a test tied to a diploma, or a diploma tied to a test?
So we pushed it back 1 year because we just needed a year to figure out the new requirements. We're going to bring a proposal to the council in the next month or so, and in that proposal, what we're getting lots of positive feedback about, there would be a mechanism for a student to demonstrate a statewide standard of proficiency in literacy and math, but there would also be opportunities similar to that to demonstrate that they've engaged in a course-based pathway progression. So what we're going to advance is something that demonstrates not only a comparable standard, but also reflects the student voice as they pursue their high school
In
courses.
2021, by pushing it back a year,
Yeah,
we're talking
we just had to
2021.
push it back a year
Okay.
to give us some time to figure that out.
Dr. Ken Wagner, Commissioner of Education, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
And look, this is pretty complicated stuff. I urge you to read Dan McGowan's Everything You Need to Know about Dr. Wagner's policy. It's on WPRI.com. You can read it there. If you missed any of this program, you can also catch this show on WPRI.com. For Dan McGowan and Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.